Good evening. Now, after 3 days or 4 days of intensive festival, we have reached the final conference event and the last keynote and the keynote conversation of transmediale evolutive. So, welcome to Strange Ecologies, from Necropolitics to Reproductive Revolutions. I think it's a very fitting conclusion given this discussion that we're having around the elusiveness, or perhaps indeed non-elusiveness, also as some speakers reminded us yesterday, of technological human and non-human environments. And here we will have a conversation on how the ways that we live and die can be rethought and rewrought, and how that's also a process that's necessary in order to carve out new forms of resistance and existence in today's indeed strange ecologies that, according to capitalist power structures, work to simultaneously naturalize and denaturalize the planet, its resources, and it does this also in various oppressive or exploitative ways. So I'm very happy that we have for this panel participants who are well, not exactly strangers to transmediale. We have two artists. Well, in one case at least, it's somebody who has been several times presenting here as part also of the critical art ensemble, of course, Steve Kurtz. Then we have, in the case of Johannes Raether, an artist who is very prominently featured in the Alien Matter exhibition. The moderator is Diana McCarty. I will introduce her in a bit, but I would like to thank, of course, the Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung for supporting the conference program of transmediale. And for this particular event, I would like to also thank the Digital Cultures Research Lab at Leuphana University, who indeed have invited Steve Kurtz to do a residency, and that's why also yeah, he's been able to be here at the festival. So thank you to that. And I would also like to thank the Leuphana Arts Program, who has supported the work of Johannes Raether. So, yeah. Diana McCarty, who will soon take the stage here, is a cyberpunk media activist who lives and works in Berlin. Well, her CV actually says she was a cyberpunk, but I kind of like to think it's cool if you're still a cyberpunk then. So she founded the, together with Pete Schulz, Reboot FM radio, which operates here out of HKW. She also co-founded the Faces mailing list, an important channel for feminist art and technology practices. She's also been involved, of course, in NetTime and many other important outlets for kind of a well, European critical net culture since the 1990s. Her work revolves around art, gender, politics, and technology. Last year, together with the Tactical Tech Collective, she co-initiated the exhibition Nervous Systems here at HKW, which explored the questions of, well, the theme of quantified life and the social question. I was also very happy that transmediale played a small part in this exhibition. So, yes, one mention just before Diana comes on stage. After the event, there is a DJ set by Easter downstairs in the cafe that kind of thematically connect to some of the topics here and the Alien Matter exhibition. So, all very welcome to join us back down there for kind of a almost post-festival hangout. Now, warmly welcome Diana and the speakers.
So, yeah, hello. And first, I'd like to thank, of course, Christopher Gansing and the entire transmediale crew for allowing me the great honor and privilege of, I think, having the opportunity to create a little framework for, if not the summing up, but the closing keynote. And of course, we get to dominate and describe what will happen in the next 30 years of the Transmediale Festival. So thanks for that. Unlike Wendy Chan, I'm way less polite. I'm not going to apologize for being cranky. I am going to say, when the world is a little bit less bad, I might be a little less cranky. But cranky is not always bad, and I was really happy to get cranky on the dance floor at YAM last night with the CTM festival. So I probably should come with a really clever quote. And my plan was to sort of bring in Donna Haraway and kinship and kin And actually, as Rosa Mencken was good enough to remind me of yesterday, of course, that's also about not just who we are in relation to other people, but other entities. I'm not giving you a quote. I think hopefully you've got some kind of device that connects to the interwebs. Find your own. But I also want to get away from a kind of what I would call a heteronormative logic that forces people to legitimate where knowledge comes from. And I think one of the things that is important for this panel, but this festival, and what it means to be a producer of knowledge and culture in this kind of wonderful new era of global fascism, is that we have to sort of look at how and what and who has the great privilege to create knowledge. We have to question where the knowledge comes from, who has access to it, who has the right to speak, what types of knowledge count when and where. And I think this is, like, for me, it's a kind of radical feminist gesture to actually not just give you a quote. And instead, I'm just going to give you some names. And if you don't know them, it's fine. And the thing is, what I'm pointing out is that the knowledge that brings us here, the resources that go into creating this space, this building, which has just been wonderfully renovated, actually didn't just appear naturally. So a lot of work and effort and political struggles went into creating this intellectual space, this geographic space, this like space of different types of affinities. And some of the people that have made this happen might be familiar to you, they might not be. But I'm just going to go through a short list of names. Sakina Chances, Elena Stasova, Sorwana Inés de la Cruz, Hannah Arendt, Seda Gurses, Grade Colomba, Rosa Luxemburg, Chelsea Manning, Tetina Silas, Ala Mitrofanova, Miriam Makeba. And I am going to give you a little tiny quote, which is Mina Manon, who is speaking to us from the past, but in the future, because it's a film about the future that was premiered here from the Autolith group. And basically, she, of course, says in an email to a person in the past, "Isn't it a crime not to be a criminal today?" And I kind of hope it is. I hope that everything that the people here do and think is somehow criminalized, because the world we live in is kind of awful. But I would also like to not assume that everybody is on the side of what I would call a kind of anti-fascist movement. And I think, for me, it's very important for the works that are going to be shown tonight to think things through, but also to not make assumptions that the space of culture, the space of art, the space of discourse are not innocent. There are, of course, also spaces where right-wing agendas get played out, the space of science. And I think what makes me especially grateful is to be presenting and hopefully like helping the discussion along with two incredibly lovely and smart and like, I'm going to say, transgressive thinkers and actors that also happen to be white men that take up an operational logic of feminism and apply it to in ways that I think it's necessary for knowledge to be applied today and tomorrow. And hopefully these are things that actually do help us think through how the next 30 years ought to work. And then I think the mini mafia is out there somewhere, because those are the kids that are going to be inhabiting this space in the next 30 years. And we owe it to them to make it as good as possible. So, thanks for that. And I would like to basically slowly invite Johannes Paul Raether to come up to the stage. He lives and works in Berlin, and at the center of his work are constructed identities, avatars, alter identities, self-sisters, and emerging at various sites in public space where they, or she's, research, teach, and tell stories. As colorful beings, made up from everyday objects, they discuss complex topics such as bio and reproduction industries, industries, globalized tourism, or occult substances in contemporary technology. Raether's works and performances were shown at, among others, the 9th Berlin Biennale, Palais de Tokyo in Paris. Okay, I'm gonna not go through the whole biography. I have to say, rather, it's more interesting for me that Raether is in a discursive genealogy, a kind of child of critical art ensemble, and I will introduce Steve Kurtz after this presentation. Johannes, you want to?
Hi. Can we have the first image, please? Thank you. You have been told my name, but this name, as assigned for my body, is just one identifier in a multiplicity of others, of other artificial, of other constructed bodies that are entangled with this, with my body. So how is my name linked to this body? This body was called transformella. And how is my body enmeshed with this name, which is transformalor? Tomorrow I will be Protectorama, the worldwide witch, and a smartphone Zangoma. And today, I'm not alone. I am also Protector XX, idiot of witch machines, and rare earth occultist. I am the being of a swarm. I am Schwarmwesen. We research and write, produce artifacts as a herd. We call ourselves self-sisters, avataras or potential identities. Others name us ridiculous tricksters, idiots or traitors of identity and gender, family and nation. Traitors of what they call this reality, or common reality. I, as we, on the contrary, work towards the notion that in common reality, and the etymological core of common is mean, that a mean reality is to be betrayed with and for a potential. For the potential and with the potential of another real. The potential of an unredeemed real that is slumbering within the normal. So metaphorically speaking, we are constantly precipitating identity-specific realities from the infinite flux of multiple potential realities, and we share them with our peers to become common or communal, and communal shares the same etymological core as mean. So we do not come from another time, or we do not come from another world. We are vessels into our constructed, into our communal realities, while we embody them in the mean, in the here, in the now. So we crystallize here now, and simultaneously we configure again another order. We produce potentiality against reality. But how do I report from all of me when we are not present at once, but remain entangled in a commensal host symbiont relation made up by natural and constructed bodies? How to report when my as our name to body to identity relation, our body to language to reality relationship is willfully distorted? How to document what might be better described as a self-generating, irrationally meandering mythology? Well, diagrams. It's diagrams. In our potentiality, we call the order of beings identitecture. Identitecture is our constructed, continuously evolving genealogical tree of an experimentally and technogonically sprawling herd. Identitecture records the forking of potential life. It frames our names, appearances, crystallizations, assignments, sites, and methods. It is the diagram of our reality construction, and it is the evolving organigram of our identity management. Through it, we understand the process of forking. We partition, reproduce version of ourselves, manufacture as yet another identity, a proxy identity. So that continuously family becomes order, genius becomes family. When we crystallize and precipitate new identities and advance the process of self-evolution, our future is constructed as a meta-narrative that spills over the confinement of cultural platforms and autonomous artworks in the form of these exuberantly growing lifelines that I'm scrolling through here. This is my magical self-sister Protectorama, the first in the witches of Protectorame, the root vessel in a flock of worldwide witches. Even though she's central to identitecture, I decided to introduce her only briefly and concentrate on another lifeline, because also right here, as it was said before, down in the exhibition hall, you can experience her story, her tools, her voices in a full precipitation. But in summary, she has evolved from performing healing rituals by communeering. Communeering is what we call our social technique of de-rationalization, of reconstructing communities, and developing dysprosthetic thinking. She started to work with a community machine called the World Healing Forest, which you see here, and now uses more elaborate witch machines with a more strategic approach, infiltrating and maneuvering unusual and undiscovered ritual sites. Her lifeline is formed by moving from these rather confined ritual sites into the outside, tracing a psychic path across the planet to develop a set of counter-rituals. Rituals against a normality in which our lives have become prosthetic in and for itself. We are clogs and levers in complex capitalotrophic machines, she says. Accessories of a self-propelling and self-eternalizing circulation dominated by what she calls capitalogenic principles. And was that capitalogenic principle absent in the gardens or here at the recyclers in Johannesburg, when she became a smartphone Sangoma, a South African muti healer? Was it corroded by performing dysprosthetic ritual dances? Was it possible to find dysprosthetic sites as a mountaineering witch in the remote, in the realm of what we call nature? Or questioning the concept of a linear time, was it productive to revive an ancient ritual site, such as this stone circle on the Isle of Arran in Scotland? It certainly instigated a series of meltings, which we call communicates, a series of material imprints of a communeered convent of techno-witches. The melting then started another process, which we call forking. An identity fork in a lifeline is to make a new version of oneself, to, for example, to accommodate a changing strategy. Protectorama had already asked if not a counter-ritual were better to be performed in an imagined center of the capitalogenic real instead of the remote, like in the Cathedral of Screens on Times Square. Would the new version of herself, named Protector XX, be able to run a different ritualist script on the iDevices in another cathedral, in the iStorage in Berlin? The dialectical assemblage of the magical and the material has always been at the core of communeering witch machines that undermine the smartphone fetish. But Protector XX techno-alchemy of occult substances that run our gadget cultures Her offering of rare earth technology metals did more explicitly disturb the social order than Protectorama's earlier basic research. Maybe because it was in a more specific corporate site. Yet to be specific, it doesn't have to be disruptive per se. Like when Protectoralum, and now one element becomes one name, researched the stabilizer metal of the eye devices, which is predominantly aluminum, she was invited to the largest aluminum smelter in Iceland. The geothermal wastewater health spa, however, just next to the smelter, the blue silicon broth, trapping carbon-based touristic life forms, did not want the schizologically necessary research on their premises and ejected the witch machine while it harvested the silica from the gift shop. Even though brief, it was important to me to bring Protectorama to this lecture. She's a ritualist lifeline, a witchy community organizer. She's linked to a notion of freak reproduction, a counter-reproduction that not only aims at disrupting the reproduction of normative identities, but more importantly, to stop the rationalization of this normality. It is equally important for me to deviate to another lifeline, the youngest, even though it will be even shorter and therefore on the verge of actually not reporting at all. It's merely to mark its existence, to clarify the distinct practices of the various beings a bit, for the reason that two of the sisters just can't be properly seen with one missing. I won't be speaking about Schwarmwesen very long. It's swarm being in English. I still don't like that term. But it's a creature so abstract and deficient, it hopefully already achieved to stop the reproduction of any normal identity concept and steered deep into the nameless, into the languageless terrain of a symbolic appearance. Its concepts are torn apart. The terms it uses are heavily metaphoric. So organizing this moment of not reporting around three deficiencies seems like a perfectly fitting way to introduce it in negativity to the others. Because the Schwarm frames itself as an embodiment of geopathology, the sweet, poisonous desire to be and remain anywhere specific in a translocal hypercirculation of human bodies. It frames itself as a being of chronostrophy, the catastrophic dysfunctioning of what it calls body time inflicted by that circulation. And as a carrier of capitalotrophic addiction, the threat of metabolic dysfunction if you step out of capitalist time and space consumption. Schwarmwesen does not share the same momentum of evolution as the two self-sisters I'm going to talk about longer. In fact, I'm rather clueless of what will happen next in this lifeline. It, as us, we have stopped strategizing and hopefully started freak reproduction in and for this very lifeline. It is contrary to this more scheming and constructivist approach of self-evolution by Transformella. She's the repro research avatara species. As the queen of the breed, Transformella generalis, as she's also called, the first version of herself, was crystallized in the whiteness of teaching caves. Her research was dedicated to the processes in which biodigital capitalism transforms the way we reproduce things, we reproduce beings, and we reproduce ourselves. Her focus was the triangulation of biotechnological industries, such as surrogacy centers, fertility roads, cryotechnologies, and egg cell markets, with the global communication and jet plane network. to research, Transformella left the White Caves and went to find what she suspected to be an emerging reproductive colonialism. She went to see the surrogacy centers in India, where she found a global elite of repro-technological early adopters, internet users, and economy class fertility tourists. Fertility tourists that get their babies produced by poor Indian women. She met Naina Patel, the first utero surrogacy capitalist on the emerging global fertility market. And she found her immersed in a human-machine mothering triangulation. We have called her, Naina Patel, meta-mother, and she rises in the reproductive colonies. She is the new mother totem in the midst of what we call a reproduction revolution, the Reprovolution.
And today is the first time Jennifer will see the tiny life growing inside of her.
You ready, Jennifer? What are you feeling?
I'm feeling overwhelmed.
So now here we have, this is Jennifer, your baby. Yes?
Yes, beautiful.
What are you feeling, Jennifer, looking at your baby?
Oh my gosh. I just am amazed. At only 8 weeks, oh my gosh. I just feel in awe. I've waited a long time for this, so it's really exciting.
The heart of the baby.
Wow, it's strong. Wow, that is beautiful
Yes,
and
this
loud.
is the baby's heartbeat.
Wow.
Is that a strong heartbeat?
Very good heartbeat for this time of pregnancy.
Just the life there is just so amazing.
What's that like, Jennifer, to hear your baby's heartbeat?
It's a miracle. You know, I'm thanking God. I'm just so excited, and I wish my husband could be here to hear it.
I hand Jennifer my phone so she can share this moment with her husband, Kendall, who's back at home in LA. It's 3 a.m. there.
I have something for you to hear. We have one very healthy baby. You want to hear the heartbeat?
What is so interesting in this triangulation that we see in this video is not just the politics of visibility that are applied to the different mothers. The surrogate mother, for example, is made totally invisible, covered and veiled, while meta-mother Naina Patel is holding the ultrasound to the womb outside the frame. It is also the symbolism of the intended mother's hand holding the phone device to the screen of the ultrasound, sending the heartbeat across the globe. Not only does it evoke the creation of Adam by Michelangelo, it could almost be a visualization of Haraway's concept of the relation of machine and organisms as a border war, in which the stakes are production, reproduction, and imagination. We, the Transformellae, we cannot find pleasure in the confusion of these boundaries anymore, as Haraway proposed it in the 80s. And to assume responsibility, as she also suggested, as to assume responsibility in their construction, how can that be done today? It became clear to Transformella that she needed to construct her own devices against a series of updates, against a reprogenetic biologization of modernist industrial class relations, against a utero economy and its cell circulation services, and against a globalized reproductive industries capitalizing on economic segregation. Devices I see more in an abstract sense. Sure, it's tools and languages, mutated terms, as you probably have noticed, but most importantly, it is new reproductive devices that become bodies to take on this repro reality. We are psychorealist research avataras. We can't work without experimental methodologies, without being immersed in various communities. So yes, we still roam the metropolis of their white genetic supremacy, visiting their sites of care work. And we preached on their street corners. But more important than the sites in this lifeline is the construction of the repro-techno tribe as a social and communal device. It is to organize reproduction on a societal level again. Guided by a repro-communal manifesto and in gatherings called Repro Reality Hack Labs, we were to appropriate the sexological machinery for our means. And I quote from Transformella's Repro-Communal Manifesto. Let us use the technosexologic machines for an attack on the nuclear family. We want to procreate outside and parallel to romantic relationships. We want to construct multisexual, multigendered, and technologically assisted parenting groups with 3, 5, or more individuals of various cultures, backgrounds, milieus, and social strata. We will engage in techno-progressive communeering. We will become repro-communal mothers of a techno-reproductive tribe. Join our repro-communal reprovolution. And ultimately, she forked herself into a new version of herself, into Transformalor version number 4.6. It's a more fierce and vicious mother, a disruptor of family pattern, and a propaganda avatar of the repro-communal tribe. Transformalor's notion is that through the digitization, the exploitation of life in itself as a production site, as well as the adaptation to reproductive ideals of imperative fertility and thus productivity, the delimitation of humans has not already just happened, but it has been totalized. And into this totality of breeding, its endless reproduction, the global divisions of labor that come with it, the romantic ideologies that uphold it, into this catastrophe that is the digitalized family, Transformalor is an intervener. It is in this reprovolution that brings completely new customer groups into the reproductive scenarios, old and infertile people, as well as queers and protagonists of this new inclusion. Their home stories are circulated as evidence of the symbolic currency of the family as a structure, a newly deepened, emotionalizing aspect of reproduction. The reformation of the sexuality of the reproductive family in the moment of its technological replaceability functions as a kind of homeopathy. Rainbow families as a vaccination for an otherwise doomed social relationship. But the stasis of the family as a biologically naturalized structure is the viral strength of its sordid core. The catastrophic stability of the imposed community of reproduction is its adaptability to every technological and economic update. Its resilience lies in mutation. The family does not need technological and economic rationality. Its processes of decay are no reason to hope for its cancellation. Instead, they are divisions and multiplications of an essential core as strategies for assimilating to a new technological environment. And the quasi-immunological resistance to of the modern family against its responsible technological confusion, as Haraway suggested, against its disillusion, is its catastrophe. Transformalor's attack is obviously not aimed at your personal family. or your or my family are as catastrophic as subject-shaped humans can be to one another. In German, we say mal so, mal so. The catastrophe is the family as the only reproductive structure, as a modern, coercive, reproductive vessel. The video that you saw before is played on a data body associate brain. Transformalor carries around their waist this data body associate brain in this picture while discussing Reproduction with two IKEA workers. This device, and I'm going to zoom in on it, hosts all the materials and voices and images ever produced by the lifeline of repro research avatars. It functions as a data body shared by the various temporal bodies and potential identities, and it sends at the same time materials to the associated tribe. The question that the video on this device raises are fairly simple. Are the people around the ultrasound device a nuclear family? And if so, where is the nucleus? Are these people an extended family? And if yes, how strong are the bonds between the diverse functions in this repro-technological setting, in this setup? On this very same brain, on the associate data body of the repro research avatars, there is also a few diagrams by me, as us, that try to visualize the technosocial affiliations that are possible within the unfolding reprovolution. With these diagrams, I've tried to sketch out a first, maybe speculative architecture of reproduction using the metaphor of the chemical bond. And I have appropriated reprotechnological Begriffspersonen, which is loosely translated into characters or types. I have learned this from the witch, the thing with the chemical bonds, that is. I've learned that in the wastewater health spa, because when silicon connects to oxygen, it becomes stone. An entirely different essence than our notion of the metal used in virtually every computer chip. So accordingly, we will have to create repro-tribal architectures in which there is no essence, but various qualities determined by the strength and the durability and the timescale of multiple, various, different, and very diverse bondings, be they social, be they technological, be they local, be they emotional or practical. So as you see, the structure of the repro tribe is still a body in question mark, and the diagram is really poorly sketched. Yet the necessity for an alternate embodiment, the necessity to destroy the family as a structure by appropriating it in its catastrophe with the aid of reprotech is a vector. In Reprovolution, we have the choice to yield to the capitalist updates of reproduction containers, or to liberate reproduction technology from its own biopolitical and systemic determination. Thanks. I'm just going to have to change for Steve.
And just please do save your questions. Remember, there is a translation, so if you're a German speaker or actually we've only got English and German, but we're going to save the questions for Johannes until after Steve's talk, so save your questions. Thank you, Johannes, by the way. I think we give another round of applause and embrace. So if you're thinking of starting a family, I think you've already got a few ideas of how that could be different. So I'm really happy to introduce Steve Kurtz. He's a founding member of the Critical Art Ensemble. Of course, Steve has been here at the festival, I think even before it was transmediale. So he's a long-term proponent of a critical sphere of electronic culture. So I am going to read you a little bit from his biography, but it's rather the Critical Art Ensemble biography. It's a collective of cultural interventionists of various specializations, including digital imaging and web design, film and photography, text art, book art, wetware, and performance. It was formed in 1987, and their focus has been on the exploration of the intersections between art, critical theory, technology, and political activism. And the collective Critical Art Ensemble has performed and produced a wide variety of projects for an international audience at diverse venues ranging from the street to the museum to the internet. And I have to say I'm particularly happy to introduce Steve. Do you want to slowly make your way up here? Steve Kurtz. Of course, I'm really honored because he's also an old friend, an ally, and somebody who I think has been influential for many of the people that are here, and certainly for Johannes Paul Raether. So, and yeah, you're going to do the stage thing. Okay. So,
can we turn this one on? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so first off, I do have the Berlin virus, like I can hear many of you also do. So if I melt down partway through, you'll know why. We got to do a couple thank yous first, of course, to Christopher for allowing the artists to take the big stage here in the final section of the festival. Daring, to say the least. Yeah, come on. It doesn't always have to be the academics, right? We can do alternatives. Thank you, of course, to Diana. But the biggest thanks goes to the audience for coming out. You know, when you get to the last session and it's been 4 days of nonstop grueling panels, if you can get to the last one, still be paying attention. I don't see a single person falling asleep. You deserve some appreciation, so I'm sending that out. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Okay, now with the pleasantries out of the way, we are going to talk about some horrible things. It's Germany in winter, so I think it's appropriate. And yes, we're going to talk about necropolitics. But by way of getting into this, I want to start with Max Horkheimer. And probably a number of you know that around 1960 or so, Horkheimer returned to one of his childhood philosophical idols, and that was Arthur Schopenhauer, and it culminated in an essay called Schopenhauer Today. Now, why did he do that? Well, what he was interested in was not so much the metaphysics of Schopenhauer, but he was really interested in Schopenhauer's confrontation of suffering. And by that part of the 20th century, Horkheimer had really seen some suffering. World wars, atomic bomb explosions, genocides, Great Depression. It was vast. And you want to know, how do you cope with it? How do we talk about this? Well, I think that would be equally as applicable today. We could go back and look at Schopenhauer again. Perhaps we're due for a pessimist revival. But I think there's also another reason we might want to go back and reread The Old Boy again. And that's because we have to rethink that thing we hate thinking about, and that is, are we actually, as Schopenhauer contended, non-rational creatures? Are we really run by reason? You know, the old Platonic chariot where reason is in the chariot guiding the horses of desire and will. And that kind of stood all the way through the Enlightenment, that we are just these inherently rational creatures and we do things the rational way. Schopenhauer comes along and says, no, that's not really how it happens. It's probably that, yeah, we have an intellect, but it's probably more in service of other more primitive motivations. And that's interesting to me at this particular time. And as we look at what would probably be the followers of Schopenhauer, whether they claimed it or not, over the past 100 years, I mean, that's the Freudians, of course, wandering along this same pathway. And, then around Horkheimer's time, around the late 50s, early 60s, we get the marketeers thinking, humans aren't that rational. We can kind of press their buttons and make them do what we want them to do, buy what we want them to buy. And that sticks around all the way to today. And we even heard on the Saturday night keynote, right, of the Trump campaign feeding Facebook the right kind of stimulation to get people to go out and vote for Trump. And I guess clearly it partially worked. We can give that some kind of causal effect. So it makes us question a little bit about this question of rationality. And how far does this continuum stretch between the non-rational and the rational? And I would contend, if you really want to look at some non-rational stuff, one of the first places to look is how we think or don't think about death. Now here's one of the things Critical Art Ensemble has been doing lately to amuse ourselves, is filling up galleries with statistics about death, just to see what kind of conversations can come up. Now, you don't have to look at this chart too long to see that there's no real sensible pattern to any of it. And so I'm going to focus on two examples off this one. That's why I put this one up. Lawn darts and alcohol. Okay, lawn darts. For those of you that don't know what a lawn dart is, it basically is a great big dart. It's part plastic in the shaft, and then at the end it has a very heavy piece of metal for the point. And you get two hoops, and you place the hoops far apart from each other, depending on how far you want to throw the dart. And then you arc the dart and you try to land it in the hoop. Now, on one unfortunate weekend, a little girl who was playing lawn darts got a lawn dart thrown at her, and it landed in her head, it cracked her skull, and it killed her. And this put the father on a one-person campaign to make sure that no one could ever play with lawn darts again. And it made the news, it was talked about in Congress, and finally it was decided that because one person had come to a bad accident, lawn darts should be no more. That's it. No more lawn darts. If you had them, you could keep them, but they were not going to be manufactured anymore. Okay, that's story number one. And we will contrast this with story number two. Alcohol, which in the US killed 41,682 people. 41,000. Anything done about that? Any remedy? No. No remedy for that. 41,000, that's okay. And now a lot of you guys know me, and you know that for the past 30 years, I've made a career of getting on my soapbox and complaining about unjust deaths, right? And I do leave my soapbox lying around, so don't trip over it on your way out, that I'm on it again tonight. I have complained about that, and so I'm going to be the first to step forward and claim my inner hypocrisy and say, bad luck for the 41,000 people, because when it comes to alcohol, I want it to be plentiful, cheap, and readily available. And I'm assuming there's a lot of you that feel the same way. It's like, if it takes 41,000 people I've got to sacrifice so I can have a drink after I'm done with this panel, well, that's fine with me. There's no reason alcohol should be legal. It attacks all the soft tissue. And just death aside, but just the amount of money society has to deal with alcoholism and all the accidents that go with it, all the crime that goes with it. This stuff fuels a lot of ridiculous stuff. And if we were rational creatures, we'd probably go along with the prohibitionists and say, we should probably do something about alcohol. But not on my watch. I know how to get that kind of activism going. Just try to take my alcohol away. All right, so here one more story along this line. One of the things that gets talked about in the US a lot, particularly in regards to the wars in the Middle East, is how many American soldiers have been killed. And it's around 6,500 plus. And it's a topic of conversation from activists. It is a topic of conversation for the warmongers. And certainly there is a very advanced necropolitics within the military, and they have a word for this 6,500. It's acceptable losses. When you consider from 2001 to 2013 that all that has been lost is 6,500 people, that's considered light. That is a lot. That is low on the death range. But, and here in contrast again, much like alcohol and lawn darts, there is another statistic that floats around, and it's never talked about, ever. We don't really bring it up. We just kind of leave it as a secret. And that is that 72,000 soldiers in this same time period died from suicide. Yeah, I mean, it's like, well, that's quite a contrast. 72,270 in the same time period. Now, I mean, I can use a simple psychology here and say, well, the reason that is, of course, is as soldiers are mapped as courageous, you know, we can't have them talk about them as killing themselves. That wouldn't be right. That looks bad for the military. That looks bad on our soldiers. And then, of course, and I think this is kind of true in Western culture in general, but certainly in the US, that we have the worst narrative of what suicide is, right? It's something you do because it's selfish, which is not why these guys are killing themselves. Okay, so I think we can establish, to some degree, at least speculatively, that we have a pretty bizarre relationship to death. And so we've been working with this. This is a project that we did with Yoha. Probably a lot of you saw Graham Harwood's and Yoha's piece down at the exhibition. And this was another one we've been working on, and it has a lot of layers to it. But one of the layers that's relevant to this conversation is, how do you start conversations about what is dead, what is extinct, what has been dispossessed, what has disappeared? And this was one of the registries that we really tried to work on in this project, to try and get rid of a little bit of an alienation about talking about elements that we have to talk about, but would prefer not to. Right? It is a very strange side of alienation, and we all know there's biopower and biopolitics. The opposite side of the coin is there too, and it deserves the same level of analysis, but it's not really getting it. So we went to people and had them tell us what kind of stories, what is happening in your area of the Thames that is in a lot of trouble in terms of pollutants, in terms of extinct species. If any of you saw Fran today down in the cafe stage, he did a very good job of talking about the level of extinction that's happening at Southend and in the Thames estuary. And we just collected these stories of all kinds, not just, you know, bad stories. There were a lot of, but, you know, good ones too. Things we're glad are gone. Like, we're glad there's not public hangings at Southend anymore. We're glad there's not cholera outbreaks anymore. You know, we tried to cover it all, positive and negative. You know, folks that we missed, like Roy Patty Bates. I know probably, I don't know how many people know who Roy Patty Bates is? See, a few people, but you actually all do. He is the person from Leigh-on-Sea, from Southend, who started pirate radio and began the rock and roll revolution in London. So he, of course, deserved to go on the boat. And it's just to hear what different people and what they thought were important and how they wanted to talk about death. And I can't say that beyond the conversations we got very far, because, you know, obviously this kind of monumentalism that we're using here is pretty traditional. You know, it doesn't advance it. It's kind of like we're still in graveyard land, which is unfortunate. So here was the kind of thing we were doing. And when it comes to environmental art and to environmental activism, so much of it is based around the model of preservation and saving, right? We're going to preserve the wilderness, or we're going to save a part of the wilderness. We're going to save the tigers. We're going to save the whales. We're busy saving stuff all the time. And you know, we were not any different. We were trying to figure out how could we make different kinds of eco-machines, different kinds of relationships and flows that could lead to a different kind of result in terms of environmental activism. And in this case, it was, how do we save urban fields and spaces and micro ecosystems from developers, right? A problem here in Berlin, a problem in London, a problem in New York, pretty much any city you go to. How do we do it? And what we suggested was that we could find an endangered species that had also been domesticated, in this case, Cupid's dart, a nice, beautiful flower, and that we could plant that into spaces that were in danger from the bulldozers. And then we could get an injunction out and say, look, these are protected species. You can't bulldoze here. It was, yeah, it's a great, you can't do it everywhere because there's a lot of variables that have to line up just right. But when it works, it kind of works. But the only thing we really end up doing is deferring what's going to happen, and that's the developers will eventually win, right? In Italy and in the US, you know, it's kind of the person with the most money and the most lawyers will eventually win out. So we could defer for a long time, and then we could also do a kind of publicity campaign at the end. And there's not any developer or corporation that likes their bulldozers filmed running over endangered flowers. That makes some pretty good counter spectacle, I got to give you that. But ultimately, we're not really getting anywhere, right? It's just a deferral, and the natural world, it's still shrinking down. That continuum's getting smaller and smaller and more asymmetrical to the side of economy and culture. All right, I put this in as a kind of callback. Molecular invasion. And this we were looking to try and build a kind of contestational biology. And this was last time I was here, which I think, when was the last time I was here, Christopher? 2005? 2006? 2005. All right, this is what we were talking about. So a callback then. And what we were going for then, and still are trying to work on this project, so those of you who are the science people, please help out on this if you can, was a provocation. We had really good armor because we had a very conservative institution that allowed us to come in to do this public experiment. So it made it very hard for Monsanto to counterattack us, although they did. I'll get to that. And what we wanted to do was find a way that we could create an herbicide that would only attack Monsanto Roundup Ready products. And the principle that we were using to do this was that any trait of adaptability could be turned into a trait of susceptibility. This was the principle that we really wanted to get out into the world, and thought that researchers better than us, and know a lot more about biochemistry than we ever will, could pick up and run. And we're still kind of fingers crossed that that may happen someday. Now, I'm sure many of you are going, Steve, you're an artist. How could you do such complex experimentation to ever find this chemical that would solely attack Roundup Ready? Well, we knew what gene it was, but here's what we knew how to do better. And that was how to use a database. And we also knew that Monsanto had to release all their research in order to get the patent for these plants. So we just had to go through their database and find where they had been trying to find what would mess these plants up. And they check to see what can go wrong with our product. There's a bunch of it. Most of it was pretty nasty, so we couldn't use it. But we did find one thing, pyridoxal 5-phosphate, which is a vitamin, so it doesn't hurt animals, it doesn't hurt people, it doesn't hurt other plants, it doesn't hurt the soil. But when you mix Roundup Ready and sunlight on a Roundup Ready plant, it melts it down. And we did this, experimented openly and publicly. And I don't know, we got a few days in, and Monsanto's lawyers were filling that gallery. There must have been a dozen of them, waving cease and desist letters and saying they were going to sue us and that this was the end and, you know, we can't tolerate such. Well, we didn't pay attention to it, obviously, because, you know, it's like, well, what are you going to do? You're going to sue the Corcoran? The Corcoran? The other show that was on at the same time of us was Jackie Kennedy's Ball Gowns. Right? Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. That's not happening. And they didn't. Although we often wonder, what if they had? Because it would have settled an interesting properties mess. And that is the actual seeds. Because why Monsanto was saying they were going to sue us, they were going to sue us for license infringement. Right? That we were using these seeds that we had no right to use. We hadn't paid the licensing fee. Now, how did we get these seeds? Well, the way we got them was Claire Pentecost went out into the countryside. She lives in Chicago, Illinois, so she's right there in Monsanto country. And she started to go around to various seed distributors and saying, would you sell me some Monsanto seeds, of which they all would say, no, we can't do that because you're not licensed to have them. And finally, she came across one seed distributor who said the same thing, no, we can't sell you because you're not licensed to have them. But, wink, wink, if you go out back, we've thrown some away. Ripped open, but she goes out back into the dumpster and pulls out these bags of seeds, which is what we ended up using to do this project. Now again, here we are doing the same thing. We know we're working with death here. We're trying to kill their stuff. They're trying to kill our stuff. But it's never discussed on that term. Right? We went through this whole project, this whole arc. It went on for years. And the discussion, the necropolitics, that is a fundamental part of this, and a fundamental part of why we got involved in the first place, that never got discussed. Because, you know, what Monsanto is doing, and especially was doing then in North America and in India to a large extent, was the pollen from their Roundup Ready would blow into traditional farmers or organic farmers' crops, infect it, I mean, basically, you know, turn it into Monsanto product. And then Monsanto would sue the farmer. You think it'd be the other way around, right? That the farmer's like, my seed bank's ruined. No, that's not how it went. And that's how Monsanto was leveraging people into buying these products. All right, we'll get back to Monsanto again later in the talk. But this is what's happening in the environmental movement. Now, before I get going on this section of the talk, I just want to say that the two people I'm about to show, Lear Keith and Edward O. Wilson, I really respect these people. They're really smart. They've made major contributions to the environmentalist movement. You know, I, for the most part, really enjoy their work. And I think it's really good, and I recommend it. However, what we're going to be looking at tonight is this little section of theirs where they have just gone off the rails. And the reason they've gone off the rails is because of an absolute refusal to acknowledge that a necropolitics needs to be developed. Right? So, here's Lear. Finally, we aim for coordinated multiple attacks using surprise. What we are ultimately after is cascading systems of failure. The point is not to make a statement. The point is to make a decisive imperial impact. In other words, we bring it down. I don't know if she understands what she's saying. I mean, one, this could never happen. We know the history of such activist adventurism in the West. You're either in jail for the rest of your life, and most likely you're dead if you ever tried something like this. There's no kind of popular front that's going to house you. I mean, it's going to be RAF time or Symbionese Liberation Army. But let's just consider the proposition that's being proposed. And this is something that is really kicked around among the radical end of the environmental movement, right? It's the accelerationist position that we can hurry this along. And if we really went and started to take out critical infrastructure to civilization, we could, as she says, bring it down. And it's like, really? Do you know, the fact of how many people would die if this was actually possible. And you have to remember, the deep green position is that we need to get back to prior to agriculture, right? Horticulture is about as far as people should go before it becomes non-sustainable, before humans start wrecking the earth. So I don't know what that's going to mean. 250 million people will be the global population, so we only need to kill off 7 billion or so. This part's never talked about. I mean, you know, the other part of how nice the world would be once, we got rid of some folks and got away from agriculture and other forms of industry. Part one, we're going to disrupt and dismantle industrial civilization. And then this is the part I like even better. And then we're going to, part two of our goal is to defend and rebuild just, sustainable, and autonomous human communities. As if after this carnage is over, you know who's left? It's all the progressives. I'm sorry to say, we're going to be the first to go. Okay, so that's number one. Here's number two. Here's Edward O. Wilson. Again, a brilliant man who's made such important contributions to biology, and a man of conviction. For 2 decades, he had to put up with protests and such like, and being called a racist and other things outside of his lectures. The only hope for the species still living is a human effort commensurate with the magnitude of the problem. The ongoing mass extinction of species, couldn't be more right, and with it, extinction of genes and ecosystems ranks with pandemics, world war, climate change. It's among the deadliest threat that humanity has imposed on itself. Okay, that's a pretty easy one to go along with. It's like, that's the easy part to agree with. And if you read his latest book, Half Earth, where this is taken from, it's a really beautifully written book. It's a lot of it is poetic, and a lot of it is this dark description of what is happening to the species of the planet. And he gets toward the end of the book, and then he gives the solutions. And this isn't an exact quote. This I've kind of lifted from the book and condensed so I could get it on the card. But I don't think I've changed his meaning any. Right? So, first off, human reproduction moves from R selection to K selection. And what that means is that we basically go from extended families to nuclear families. Now, how he thinks this is going to happen on a global scale, I'm not really sure. But he's saying that's the trend, and true, I guess it is a trend, however slow it might be moving along. And so he's like, okay, that's part one. Then part two, solutionism. This is, he pulls solutionism out from I don't know where. So we need the free market, first off, always a great idea. So we have free market economy shaped by high tech, and this is where he has and it will accelerate a shift from extensive economic growth to intensive economic growth, right? He seems to have this vision of the future where we're going to have these ultra-efficient machines, easy to manufacture, and that we will basically function through these machines and no longer have to travel or be with other people or have big houses, right? I mean, he's like completely ignoring capitalism's long-standing marriage to excess. And instead it's like free market, optimized machines, and everything's going to shrink down. All right. Okay. So keep these things in mind. You know, the half-Earth of Wilson is, again, madness. I mean, absolute madness. Think, again, of how many people would have to die to get half of the Earth returned to wilderness. Half the sea and half the land. Just the politics of even trying to work through that. Even if it stayed at a national level. This is the kingdom of soy. It could be anywhere. It could be North America. It could be India. It's completely deterritorialized in the worst case of that word. Right? Sometimes deterritorialization can be good, but in this case, it's horrible because this is dead land in every sense, culturally or biologically. It happens to be in Argentina, but like I said, it could be anywhere. This is a global stamp, and all the biotech companies are there. They're all in on this soy bonanza. Monsanto, Cargill, DuPont, you know the list. Now, here's a little bit of redemption. These farms, 20-hectare farms, a consortium of artists and biologists and farmers and architects are all working together to figure out how could you make profitable 20-hectare farms that are sustainable. And the goal is, if it can be done, and they do seem well on the way, we worked with them for a little while, it was awesome. They seem to be well on the way to getting this done. And then the belief is that there is enough Peronism left in Argentina that they could kick these bastard corporations out once and for all, redistribute the land, and start these peasant farms. That kingdom of soy that now is just truck depots, processing plants, and soy fields could be what it once was again, where it's farms and ranches, and done so in an ecological way. And I would say the reason they can have a plan that I found very exciting, a strategic plan that's actually plausible, right? That they've gone beyond tacticality. A strategic plan that is actually plausible is because they do have a necropolitics, because they do remember, at least half the population remembers the dictatorship. They know a lot about death, and they would never propose a plan like bring down industrial civilization, let half the earth go fallow. They know what that means. They actually have a different plan. And this is why I'm saying we need to develop along, where death isn't such a difficult thing to talk about, where it's not such an alienation device. And maybe we can get to a happier spot. So, as much as I don't want to talk about it, and we need to even go further to kind of the level of national parks or the military and the kind of political systems that they've developed, only we've got to do one of our own that's progressive. Because if we don't do it, what we're really doing is taking the Malthusian way of let evolution sort it out. And we definitely know evolution will sort it out. So just one thing I hope we can all think about, and here at the end, then we can go home and maybe reread a little Schopenhauer. Thank you.
I think actually, I'm just going to demand that we give it up because that was really amazing. So thanks for taking us on that wonderful trip through death.
Yeah.
So I think this is nice because, in fact, we can be really positive and enthusiastic about how the technologies of life and death are in the hands of such competent feminists. A reminder to the audience, we will take questions, but we're going to wait first. We're going to have a little conversation up here. There are microphones, so just get ready to man or woman one of your mics, or shall we come, or Itify, I don't know, Spotify, one of those mics if you want to speak to the stage up here. And I would like to, so of course, thanks again, Johannes Paul Raether and Steve Kurtz. This is really, I think, for me, very exciting. And I am actually pretty hopeful for the next 30 years because it looks like there's a lot of room and space in different directions to be operational in ways that could be better for the planet and the people and so on. My question, in a way, like, I have a lot of questions for you both, but one is basically, first of all, because the notion of reason and rationale, or like to be rational beings, in a way is so morally charged, yeah? And I would like for both of you to address that, because in both cases, I think you're dealing with a lot of sets of knowledge, but you're actually not claiming a position in relationship to rationality. So I'm going to start with you, Steve, and then we're going to ask, yeah?
Oh my God. Well, I mean, part of it is that they appear to be inseparable to us, right? In Western tradition, the reason we can be moral is because we are rational. And unfortunately, what seems to have happened is an actual inversion of that. And Johannes's work is like a great example, that as we become hyper-rationalized, it's actually the exact opposite. The greater the immorality that happens. It's kind of a shocker. And yeah, we're in the position right now where the visibility of that immorality is probably stronger and more intense than ever.
Okay, and you, Mrs. Freak Generator?
Well, I kind of concur with that in reminding of this word I used a lot, which is embodiment, and making bodies out of these sort of theoretical or philosophical traits. And I do the same with irrationality in the sense that these freaks, these personas and identities are made to be irrational and to act in a way that I couldn't be without being attested a mental condition. And from that, I think actual realities spring up. And I like to strategize in that, not to basically immerse myself, but more have an oscillating relation with that irrationality that produces, because it does have consequences also for my body, for, as you've seen in this infiltration of the ice storage, is that it can have grave consequences if you embody the irrationality of a witch. But the oscillation between the two states I'm trying to explore.
Okay, that's because, of course, I would like to also take up primitive, because again, this is something which, when you bring it up, it's also something that's dismissed as primitive would be backwards or somehow like less good. So it also has a kind of moral weight. And of course, on the one hand, because you're referring to Schopenhauer and like what could be primitive and the types of knowledge that count. And you are, of course, also creating like irrational but also primitive technology cultures for the present. So this is, now we're going to start with you then. Let's go with primitive.
Okay, well, as you've seen, the tech I'm producing is really fairly primitive if you compare it to the technology I actually want to talk about. The same difference that Steve described in between wanting to do an infiltrator, a corroder of a plant, and then not having the technological means to do so, that kind of is a very often perceived thing for me. I think it's then a matter of an artist to sort of find an order of aesthetics around it that make it viable nonetheless. And as we are talking about a community work, about which community organizes and repro devices, I think it can be social technologies, and they can be really advanced without big capital means and without financial cushions, basically.
The primitive. Well, that's something that, you know, in the case of the environmental movement, it got in there in the 19th century. Lewis Henry Morgan, thanks a lot, bud. Go and study the Iroquois like that. And, you know, these kind of incredibly romantic misconceptions got entrenched into social theory, and we can't really get out of it. That it always seems like if we can go back to these different times, that there is a greater oneness with nature, that it's a less alienated form, and hence the goodness. And you know, and I guess we have to thank Rousseau a little bit as well. So. Yeah, it's just one of those mythologies and one of those constructions. You just have to call it when you see it, and just remind everyone that there's nothing essentially great about being primitive, but you know, it's got its characteristics and tendencies that can also be quite productive.
Okay, I am going to say I left a group off of my list, and I think maybe it's never inappropriate, though, in spite of this, without romanticizing the wonderful people that are water defenders in Standing Rock, but not just in Standing Rock, because the same people that are defending the water have been defending water around the world for a really long time. So here's just a non-alcoholic actual water toast to the water defenders, and actually in the really cool and advanced ways that they're using technology to do that. But yeah, without romanticizing, say, yeah, it is about politics. I'm going to ask, like, one, because of course we did tackle, both of you have tackled a little bit like solutionism, or like basically not trying to fix stuff. And I think it's more about unfixing things, and maybe I'm happy about that. But I'd like to talk about how the interventionist approach works, because one thing that Critical Art Ensemble has done is open up a space where people should not leave complicated things like electronic media, like DNA, to the experts. And you've opened up a space where people ought to get informed and participate in that, or at least, you know, not get their hands dirty. Yeah. And so there, I think the interventionist approach, and I would like you to expand on that a little bit, like what that means, because you know, you can actually mess with Monsanto and so on and unfix things.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's a couple of things here. Yeah, the first is Enlightenment division of labor. We hate it, right? I mean, it maybe was a good way to manage knowledge in the 19th century, but it's a really terrible way now, right, of making things increasingly and increasingly specialized. And, you know, we certainly need bridge builders, and we need people that can just, what I would say, instead of having expertise, that you have amateur knowledge. Now, we have to understand what that means. It doesn't mean that you're an idiot and know nothing about it and blunder in. No, it means that you do have a commitment and enthusiasm for a discipline, and that you do have knowledge and experience with the discipline. And in that way of kind of getting beyond the expert, we can expand these knowledge systems. Because as they become more and more specialized, you hear, you know, the comments of like, well, you know, I'm not a nuclear scientist, how do I know? Well, you don't have to be a nuclear scientist to understand the issues well enough to be able to say, well, I want my voice heard in how public policy is made with these things. And in the more alienated ones, like with biotechnology, which unlike a computer, it seems that that's not going to just be handed over to us. With computers, we had to get them, right? If there was a way, we wouldn't. And you know, with the cloud people, they're definitely looking to try and take them back because they gave the population too powerful a machine. But with biotech, this is starting from the get-go. It's partly why I had to go to jail for a while. You know, we're not giving the non-experts this kind of machine. So it becomes really important for us amateurs, us enthusiasts, to break into these other disciplines, to intervene in them, and to bring the knowledge out in such a way that we can distribute it better, so that a public policy on these knowledge systems and the applications they engineer to fix things, that we can have a say, that they can actually be democratically deployed instead of how they are being done now, using expertise as a way to make an elite top-down application happen. Thank you.
And I think this is actually something you picked up on, and you found definitely like different ways to use this interventionist strategy, but I think it's very fundamental to how you work. It's kind of interesting because it's perversely, I hope it's not the wrong word, more performative, and in that way, but I think it also opens up a space for how things are, but it's not just performance, because it is very much intervening into other structures and using that like intervention to explore health spas and factories. So
I'm going to try it also to take it more into this performative space and in the social space that we share in these performances temporarily. I do think that it really doesn't need to be such a technological endeavor to appropriate this institutional space, such as IKEA or Apple, for that matter. It really needs more the language that you bring into it, and this is, I do think, the power of performance as an act of speech, that you can revert realities really quickly. I do know that it's not a material reversal, and I'm very much for Steve's notion of appropriating machines. But I kind of have the feeling that the performative appropriation needs to precurse or needs to pre-run the actual appropriation, because if I had biotech right now to make this chemical bondage family, it's there, I can buy it, you know, and I still don't know how to profoundly make a productive, liberating repro-communal structure. I really don't know, and I have to acknowledge that. So even if I can buy the technology, even if it's available, which is obviously not just appropriating the knowledges, but it's there, it doesn't mean that I understand it or that I can work through it by expropriating it from its determination, its systemic determination. That's something completely different. And I don't think it just needs to work on a technological level. It really needs to be on an intellectual, social, and on a performative level.
actually, I was just like, I mean, it's kind of like, for me, I wish we could just drink a lot of wine up here, and we're going to move on to that phase of things. But I just, I had to think of, because one of the things is, it's not just the like ability to mess around with like DNA, and like, it's not that you need to grow like a half robot squirrel baby. You know, that's not the point. I think that you already open up a space where things could be different, or a family unit could be different. I think of something that Philippa Cesar has called engineered ignorance. Because actually one of the, and then when I talk about the spaces and who can produce knowledge, who can share it, who can act it out, that is also a fight to have, like, with institutions, and in a way capitalism or whatever, is that the engineered ignorance, because that doesn't just happen on the level of technology, that happens on the level of having the ability to think the thoughts that could even give you the idea to maybe transgress family units with a robot squirrel baby, you know? And that's, I think this is, like, this is a big part of it, because it's like, weirdly, I don't think that the ground to defend in the future will be technological. It will actually be in the space of our brains, like what is allowed to get into our brains and pump them up. So that's a comment from me. I just want to go into human sacrifice now. Like,
You want to go to human sacrifice?
I want to move on.
Well, yeah.
So you guys deal with human sacrifice, and then we'll let some of you, or you can ask questions. So yeah.
No, let's get the audience in on this as soon as possible. But human sacrifice, I think we discussed that pretty well in the lectures.
Yeah, are you done with sacrifice?
Well, it's something that we do on a regular basis, and simply don't acknowledge that human sacrifice is a fundamental part of any social system. And it seems there in the past there have been some that have acknowledged it better, and did their sacrificing out in the open, and then there are those that just prefer to pretend that it doesn't happen, right? I mean, the Verillion accident, it comes with every piece of technology. So and most of the time we say, well, all right, the car, a lot of people die, but I like cars. I like to be able to drive. So we just forget about it. We'll just try, we'll make the car as safe as we can, but, I like cars.
I'd sort of link it to the more extensive Beschäftigung, the more intense relationship that I have with the ritual, which happens to have this weird Hollywood connection that I don't think is so interesting. So in my rituals, there's never a sacrifice. Although I do think that for this sort of practice, some sacrifices need to be made. And just from a very practical ground of how many people can attend and how far you have to travel to do it and how much of the body temperature you can sort of kind of take. These are not big sacrifices, and it's definitely not on the level that we're talking by Steve's lecture. Still, it's that connection to that something needs to be in a certain space, needs to be done in a certain way, and needs to be kind of follow a certain score. I think that is sacrificing this illusion of, oh, we are so free to do whatever, and we can just take in things and expel things wherever. And I think that's sort of, for me, that's more linked to a ritualist discipline.
I mean, one of the things I love about your rituals is that they're never the same twice. Supposedly, right, the essence of ritual is the repeatability, that you know exactly what you're going to get. And it's
well,
never,
it's ritualist
but it's
research.
still identifiable as a ritual.
It works as making rituals that you see don't work and then go on to the next one, as I tried to convey. But because obviously none of these rituals has worked making anything better. And so keep on doing them.
Okay, I see a question. I'm just gonna have a look. We'd like to gather a few questions, so please do find the nearest microphone location. I see, yeah. And I would remind you that because of the conversation being translated and because of time and space, please do try to keep your comments or your questions brief. And if you have a specific question for either Steve Kurtz or Johannes Paul Raether, and Andreas Brookman is about to ask a question. So just let us know who you're addressing your question or your comment to. So Andreas, the mic is yours.
Yeah, thanks folks for these two really great talks and for a good discussion as well. Diana has been throwing up these keywords, and the keyword that I would like to throw up is innocence. And this is more directed at the moment at Johannes, because I'm interested in the role of the audience in the performances. And from what I understand, in the case of the IKEA excursion, people stayed in that safe space outside of the involvement, whereas in the excursion into the ice storage, people were actually held hostage by the police for 3 or 4 hours, and they became kind of physically and also in the kind of the legal framework of the outside reality, they became part of the tribe, actually, involuntarily, but it was also, I think, for many people a very interesting experience. I would like you to reflect about this innocence or the loss thereof in that performance?
Yeah, that is obviously a challenge, Andreas. Thank you. This is something that I think I would link back to this initial question of rationality and the ability to plan something like this, or plan and kind of really take all the necessary steps to make sure nobody gets hurt. If you are entering a space you're not supposed to enter in this very social formation. And the risk of that is scalable, but it's never really like, there's not the absolute certainty. And so I think in the case of these two different infiltrations, there was definitely a notion of that IKEA would be a more safe space because this corporate space configures differently than the iStorage. Nevertheless, I do think that the two different avatars, one being more of a fierce mother and the other one being a fierce witch, initiated in my working through the piece a certain ability maybe, or idiocy, as it was also called, to go about it. And there is I don't want to go into the details of why this happened as it happens, but it was definitely this notion of doing it the most, I'm going to say it, magical way it could possibly do, which is that metal touches hands. And that is very important if we, again, bring up sacrifice. The security in this case was sacrificed, and I implicated a lot of people, for which you said already, there's problems with it, and there is also very interesting moments in it. I didn't say something about innocence.
Well, the question for me on that is can difference be perceived as innocence by a majority of people when you're in that Apple store and you're Transformello or whichever character? I mean, is it possible that you will ever be perceived as innocent? I mean, it's immediate, and you know, that's why Transformalor had to come into existence.
I do think I was asked why I had to fork these lines and why Protectorama had to become Protectox and Transformella had to become Transformalo. And it was this notion that after working through parts of their lifeline, they had come to the point where there needed to be a bit less of an innocent bystander situation, but more of an actual infiltration and intervention into these two corporate realities, definitely.
And yeah, I have another question, because one of the things that, okay. I don't see you. Is that?
Hello.
Yeah, okay.
This is a question for primarily Steve, but all of you, if you have time. And this is going to be very, very challenging to challenge you, Steve, on the issue of primitivism in nature, but I'm going to make an attempt at it. I would prefer not to use the word primitivism and call it a connectedness to nature or a disconnectedness to nature. And when I think of things like a mimic octopus or a murmuration of birds or the various incredible things that happen in the intelligence of a natural world, and then I look at a lot of the really stupid things that human beings are doing with corporate technologies, would we be better off trying to survive on this planet by simplifying how we create our relations to nature? And one more example is listening to the Dakota Resistance at the moment, watching their live streams. Kind of the things that they're discussing make a lot more sense than the things that I often will hear in a lot of the sessions of a media conference.
Well, I think you're probably right about that. Because, yeah, I mean, we do have to hear about the minutiae and trivia at the media conferences. Yeah, I don't like the word primitivism either, but I don't think, and connected and disconnected is good, because that can happen anywhere along the continuum between the simple and the complex. You know, I tend not to privilege either one of those, but judge by the tendency and arrangements of that particular division. Whether it be simple or complex, I don't really care. I don't particularly have a preference for either one. It's how you analyze your way through the relationships that is what matters, and then how that manifests. Yeah.
I think we've got a question over here on the left. Hi.
Hi. My question is directed to Steve, and I was very inspired by the lecture. First of all, thank you. So I sort of see computers as like embodiments of rationality. And in a lot of ways, primitive computers were super rational because they were programmed by us to function and have a certain output and not really go beyond that. And then more advanced computers, if they could be adaptable or they could have some sort of spontaneous reaction, that would be a sign of artificial intelligence. So what I'm interested in is also this idea that rationality might be primitive, and that, and I wanted to understand more about the principle that guided your war around the adaptability is not a fitness but a weakness. It shows some sort of susceptibility. I would like to know a little bit more about how you came into that principle as well. So that's all mine. Thank you.
Yeah, that principle. We came to it through a very practical means of asking the question, how do we fight back against this crop that is ever expanding? You know, how do we do it? And the easy way was, well, you attack the gene that doesn't belong there, right? The gene that's there to protect it from the herbicide that's going to be sprayed upon it, right? In this case, that allows the plant to make extra aromatic amino acids. You attack that function. So it was, you know, it was quite literal and practical that we came to any trait of adaptability, right? That which is protecting it from the herbicide can become a trait of susceptibility. That is, we can target that and do it because no other plant has a bacteria gene in it. We can attack it on that front and be sure that it's only that plant that we're messing up, that we don't have to go around killing an ecosystem, or that we have to have collateral damage, which was what we were really trying to get away from.
Okay, so I think, slowly we're going to, I guess, close this down, and I think we're going to, you're going to do it from there. I do want to say I'm very happy to have been part of this panel.
I have a real question, actually.
You have a question first.
Oh, wait, not you again. No,
no, because, I have to, sorry. We have time now. It's like the last event. We can keep people for hours. No, but yesterday we had two keynote speakers who, I love their talks, but they kind of overdid their task of including the curatorial perspectives of every elusive, even quoting the curatorial texts and comparing them and so on. Here we haven't had the term elusive mentioned even once, or every elusive. So, but I'd like to bring it in because I think it can do something also to perhaps cross-fertilizing your talks a bit. I know, Dan, I'm violating your rule of short comments and questions. But yeah, because I felt that Steve was addressing very much elusive power structures and how to kind of create something different in terms of inhabiting different spaces differently. But in Johannes' talk, there's an embracing of a constant elusiveness and kind of forking identities. And I would like you to comment perhaps on this and how these two approaches could kind of complement, or are they opposite? I think this was not really addressed, and yeah, it seems to me that we really need both in a way, but I don't know how your approaches can be actually combined. So.
Yeah, no, I thought this was an awesome pairing, whoever made it, whether it was, I don't know who thought of this, because for the reason that I think the two approaches are extraordinarily complementary. And, you know, it just goes to show, it's like elusivity is not a bad thing, it's not a good thing. It's, you know, how are we going to apply it? So in my case, it's obvious that, you know, even a proper language for death and how to think about it, it's ever elusive. We just can't seem to get ourselves there, except if we want to talk about it at a psychological level in terms of pathology, if we want to talk about it at a natural level in terms of extinction, or we could, you know, I suppose talk about it in some ways at a social level as atrocity. And, you know, these are the only categories. This language has to be considerably more complex than that to really be able to talk through how mortality is factoring in on an everyday life basis, right? But yeah, I want to ever elusive. No, it's terrible. It's one of the slowest building discourses that I can really think of. And so, you know, it does. The idea of like, well, we have to get there. This is something we must construct. It dovetails perfectly, I think, with Johannes, who's going the other way. We have this horrible institution called the family, and we've got to take this thing apart and rebuild it again, right? It needs a full-scale redesign and repair. So, yeah, so they fit. Yeah, it's a great gelling of two different strategies.
I think taking it from Steve and the destruction of the family, I think that this idea to do exactly that is rooted in this meta-narrative that I tried to convey a little bit. And I think I did this not talk only about the theoretical or political endeavor that this particular lifeline is enmeshed in, because I do think this identity production is a systematic approach, not of being elusive, but quite on the contrary, to be very, 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 very specific. I don't want to say hyper-specific or ultra or something, but like to get granular with specificities. And that meaning to my wish and dream would be for any sort of appearance and any moment that work has been done to have a specific figure, identity, language, and site to execute it. And this is obviously not working, and there is lines where you can recognize things and objects and materials. But if I could, I would have this granular specificity that then, if you look at it as a practice, completely evaporates. But if you look at it specifically in this moment, it becomes very, very pointed, very detailed.
Okay, we've got, I think, the last question here. So.
Hey, first of all, thank you both for your talks. It was really good. My thoughts were a little bit about the future and also what she tapped into, technology. You both like kind of go in terms of civilian disobedience, and I'm also like, I mean, thinking about how the world is today, thinking what's the future of it? Because for me, it's like getting too involved also politically equals death. Either you go to jail for the rest of your life, or you actually get killed. But in terms of technologies, which is the next avatars in your minds?
Well,
Like also speaking about you're fucked whichever direction you go, which you kind of tapped into before.
Yeah, well, I don't. Yeah, there's good reason for pessimism. I have to agree with you there. I like to stick with Antonio Gramsci of pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will, and we can still do resistance without having to go to jail and without having to get killed. We just have to do it in a smarter way, sometimes in a way that allows for plausible deniability, depending on what you're doing. Because, yeah, the hotter the topic, the worse the punishment gets. And, you know, in Critical Art Ensemble, we've been attacked by everyone, you know, FBI, the Secret Service, police, religious groups, lawyers, politicians. I mean, yeah, you know, the disciplinary apparatus is everywhere, and as soon as you start pushing back, and if you're effectively pushing back at all, yeah, you're going to meet some really unpleasant people, and they're not going to be happy with you. But it doesn't have to go to the extreme. There are still tactical ways and opportunistic ways that we can do resistance, and there's lots of places, like in Argentina, where the disciplinary apparatus is broken. And these make for really good launch sites where different kinds of experiments that could never happen in Europe or North America, they can happen there. And so, you know, we do have some wilderness, some kind of activist wilderness space that we can hide in to try things that we might not could do here, that you would have to go to jail for. So, you know, all is not lost. It's bad. The situation is horrible and seemingly getting worse with every passing day. But, you know, I'm not throwing in the towel yet, and I do hope to stay out of jail, though I haven't done that great so far.
In my case, I would totally subscribe to what Steve has said, and I'm not going to, like, how do you say that in English? I'm not going to say like, oh, art protects us and this is what no, I don't think it does. It actually has and Steve is a good example that it doesn't. But I do think that within that autonomous space of art, there is possibilities of that I find interesting in using, and that is, for example, something like unreadability. The idea that something you encounter you don't understand is threatening, yes, but it's also jamming all of the reactions of the disciplinary apparatus at once. So if you carefully work with that, there is a possibility that you can go through IKEA for 1 hour and do the most like kind of out of the norm things without anyone noticing first or then not sanctioning it. There is other spaces where you can't, and there is like this finding this out and working this, I think, is going to be a work in the future to really kind of push that that notion that we can use unreadable materials and unreadable bodies in order to engage the disciplinary apparatus. That doesn't mean without being going to jail in the first place, but like challenging it, I think, is a definitely something that should go on and will go on.
Okay, you know what, I think because time is really running out, there's another question. We're going to allow this last question, so.
Actually, my question also relates to the avatar and the fact that avatars can go where we can't, and this idea of the necropolis and death, and that actually my question is to you, Johannes, and what happens to your other selves once you are maybe done with them, but do they get archived, or do they have an existence of their own? Because they're also in people's memories.
Yeah. It's a very, very interesting question that I'm dealing with it more than you would think, because it looks so like, okay, it's going this way, but like dealing with the rubble and the decay of everything they do is what I occupy myself a lot with. I have 3 of them in hibernation, I call it, or at least one of them actually fell into depression. And the third one is, it's not. So I like these terms better than death. I think they could sort of resurrect or be reapplied. And then there is the moment of forking. You can fork endlessly, so you never have to have anything die. When you just evolutionize things, then it basically just goes on, and then at some point the knowledge and the materials and the artifacts this creature, being, identity keeps on using are outdated, but they are still in use as a new version. And so it becomes more of an ecology of things and ideas without anything having to die.
Well, rebirth seems to be such a fundamental theme in your work.
And regeneration. I mean, I don't know, Christopher maybe wanted to say something. I, of course, am going to say something first, and that is that I would actually really like to thank Christopher Gansing, Daphne Dragona, Inka Arns, and the whole transmediale team. But one thing that I think is really important is that they chose this moment to basically do 30 years of the festival and make it something that maybe deals with things that are in the middle. And I like this, that here we're talking about life and death, but this in-betweenness in the middleness gives space for exactly this question about the future. Dig up some of that knowledge, and especially like this festival or this discussion heute Abend has, I think, given us space to think, and not just taking knowledge as something as an object to be consumed, but a thing that comes in, that gets into your brain and gives you space to think and do things. And at least you could think about doing things that might get you arrested. Okay, and I have to say, what I really appreciate is that, of course, it's like we don't have to look back at the last 30 years. We should look back at a whole entire bodies of knowledge and ways of thinking and doing. And some people say it's no time like the present, but I would say this is no time for nostalgia. Thanks a lot. So.
Yeah, thanks so much, Diana, and thanks for all of you for kind of also opening up these kind of present-future perspectives that I think we've been dealing with at the festival. Perhaps inspired also by Johannes, before it was the audience, maybe 12.9 version of me, and now I'm the director, 15.03 maybe version of me standing here, but I'm not going to do that by offering some words of closure or trying to kind of summarize what the discussions have been. No, I'm here because at the beginning, and you repeated now the thanks, and you extended it to the rest of the team, but I really feel I fully accept the thanks for, I'm humbled by them, but I would like to mention also some more people that have been really essential to realizing the program, especially in this room. I'd like Amelie Buchinger to stand up because you've been toiling for the whole festival here. You've done an amazing job working for the Transmediale for the first time. And I'd like us to perhaps go down now and have some murderous glass of wine. Yes, thank you so much. Bye.